Okay, everyone, I think we'll get started. Boy, that was quick. Boy, thank you for that. Good morning. My name is Robert Dorr, and I'm a resident fellow here at AEI in Poverty Studies, and I welcome you to our presentation this morning, Dad and the Diploma, the Difference Fathers Make for College Graduation. Today's topic is very important and very timely, and I have to say that I was talking about it with my family, which includes 3 college students, and when I got back to my office, there was 3 emails that were very emphatic from each one of them that made it very clear in big, bold capital letters, no stories about us. No comments, no stories about that time when you were doing the college tour and you challenged the tour guide to a debate on some subject. Nothing about us. So, well, I didn't agree to that, but for now, I won't give any stories about Michael, Andrew, or Julie to start out. But it's not only an important topic for that reason, a personal reason. We all have children and know people that are going to college. It's also an important topic because increasingly we are learning that in order to secure a safe position in the middle class, I worked in poverty programs in New York City. Sometimes we worked about getting people to the starting line. But if you want to get beyond the starting line and rise up above poverty and have economic mobility, a college diploma is key. And so in thinking about the future for young people in America, we want to look at all of the aspects of our society and of our system that contributes to a greater likelihood of achieving a college diploma. And that should include family and family structure and family involvement. And so that's why we're having this panel. I think it's as important a panel as you could have. And we have a very distinguished group. And I'm going to introduce them starting from the far right with Patrick Patterson, who is a senior manager at ICF International, a global firm that partners with government and commercial clients to deliver professional services and technology solutions. But he also manages President Obama's National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse and is responsible for the provision of training and technical assistance for the federal Healthy Marriage Initiative. He has been recognized by both President Bush and the Obama administration as a fatherhood expert. He was named the Fatherhood Practitioner of the Year by the South Carolina Center for Fathers and a Fatherhood Champion by the Pennsylvania Head Start Association. So Patrick, thank you for being here. We welcome you. Next to Patrick is our kind of representative of the younger generation, Richard Yoder. Oh, I'm sorry. All right, Patrick. Yeah, no, not in the script. All right, well, maybe we'll just say the student population. Richard Yoder is a first-year Jefferson Scholar at the University of Virginia, which I believe makes him a freshman. He is a member of the Edmund Burke Society, a conservative literary and debating club, and he is from Atlanta, Georgia. He's going to talk to us about his findings with regard to father's role in college diploma achievement. Next to Richard is Kay Heimowitz, who, like me, lives in Brooklyn, New York, which is one of her finest features. I'm a big fan of Brooklyn. But she's also the William E. Simon Fellow at the Manhattan Institute and a contributing editor to the City Journal. Kay, as I think all of us who have been reading about these issues writes extensively on childhood, family issues, poverty, and cultural change in America. She is the author of 4 books, including Marriage and Caste in America, Separate and Unequal Families in the Post-Marital Age, Liberation's Children, Parents and Kids in a Postmodern Age, and my favorite with regard to its title, Manning Up, How the Rise of Women Has Turned Men into Boys. Kay will offer very provocative comments, I'm sure, today. Thank you. And then last, but certainly not least, our AEI's own W. Bradford Wilcox. Brad is a visiting scholar here at AEI. He also directs the National Marriage Project and serves as Associate Professor of Sociology at the University of Virginia. Before coming to the University of Virginia, he had held research fellowships at Princeton, Yale, and at the Brookings Institutes. His research focuses on marriage, parenthood, and cohabitation, and on the ways that gender, religion, and children influence the quality and stability of American marriages and family life. I should say, just on a personal note, that since I've come to AEI, I knew about Brad's work, but I did not know what a great gentleman and fellow scholar he is and colleague. And he is, anywhere you go on these issues, if you talk to people from really right in the left, they mention Brad's work and his great scholarship. So we're very glad to have him, and he's going to go first. And then after that, it'll be Patrick, Kay, Richard. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert, for that gracious introduction. I'm going to jump right into this here. Let's see if I can get this thing to move forward. And that. Here we go. Okay. So this month, as all of you know, millions of high school seniors across America have made an important decision about their college future, where they're going to spend the next 4 years of their life. Based upon my professional experience talking to high school students considering the University of Virginia, where I teach sociology, many of these seniors seem unaware of how much their chances of collegiate success depend not just on their hard work or capabilities, but also on the sacrifices their parents have made to support them over the years. So my talk today focuses on one dimension of those parental investments, paternal involvement during adolescence. And I find in this research brief for AEI that young adults who as teens had involved fathers are significantly more likely to graduate from college, and the adults from more privileged backgrounds are especially likely to have had an involved dad in their lives as teens. And of course, one of the broader takeaways from today's conversation is that ed reform needs to attend not just to what happens in the classroom, what happens in our nation's schools, but also needs to attend to what happens outside of the classroom, and especially in the home. So in terms of just giving you a very brief sense of the research on fatherhood and education, I think one of the things that we've seen in work by scholars such as Sarah McClanahan at Princeton and Ross Park at the University of California is that fathers' presence in terms of family structure matters for kids, and also their style of engagement matters for kids as well when it comes to schooling. So this gives you a sense, just very briefly, of some work that Sarah McClanahan at Princeton has done. You can see here that teenagers who are living in an intact family with their father are markedly less likely to drop out of high school compared to kids who are living in a single mother household without their father. So it's just one illustration of the impact here of father's presence in terms of family structure. But it's not just sort of having a father present in the home, which seems to matter for kids' schooling, for their educational outcomes. It's also having a father who is engaged, practically, emotionally, and otherwise in his kids' lives. So this study from the U.S. Department of Education found that kids in intact families with highly involved fathers were clearly more likely to earn A's when their dads were engaged in a meaningful way with their lives, and they're also less likely to be held back in school. So what this basically is telling us is that it's not just a father's presence kind of in general, but also his engagement with his kids in particular that's helpful for kids when it comes to their schooling. But we haven't seen a focus in the research on this question of paternal involvement when it relates to really to attending and here graduating from college. How does sort of having the experience, for instance, as a teenager, influence your odds of graduating later in life as a young man or young woman from a college or from a university? So it's this question that we take up in the brief today for AEI. And I rely upon data from the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health, otherwise known as AdHealth, which is looking at kids who were in high school basically in the mid-1990s and has been tracking them across a number of waves since then. So we're looking at more particularly is the way in which paternal involvement by the teens report, by the teenage girl or teenage boys report is linked later in their lives to graduating from college. And they're asked, a number of questions in terms of involvement. Was he involved in helping you with homework? Did you play sports with him? Did you talk about a personal problem with your father? And this question is asked of kids in basically in all family structures, and they can be thinking as they respond to this question of their father, however they'd like to define it. So it could be a biological father, a stepfather, or some other kind of father figure. And in this group of teens, about 18% said that they did not have an involved dad in their lives. That's the comparison group here in the next couple of slides that you'll see. And once again, the outcome is the odds of having graduated by wave 4 by 2008, 2009 for these respondents who were by that time between the ages of 24 and 32. And what we see in this in this data basically is that kids who report that their father was involved or very involved, who scored basically in the upper half of this distribution for the whole sample, are about 98% more likely to graduate from college compared to their peers who report that their father was not involved. That 18% of teens who reported that dad was not involved. So clearly a very strong association between paternal involvement here and graduating from college. And this figure is controlling for factors like race, ethnicity, maternal education, and their household income when they were teenagers. This is kind of the net association between paternal involvement and graduating from college. But I also wanted to think too, I think we're both here at AEI and really, across the country, we're thinking a lot more about class, about stratification, about inequality. I want to think about how does this story vary by class, by kind of where you sit in the American social structural hierarchy. And because income can vary across the life course in pretty marked ways, I use here maternal education as a kind of a proxy for class, if you will, for socioeconomic status more generally. And what you can see here is that young adults, teens who have better educated mothers are obviously much more likely to graduate from college, but particularly in the sort of moderately educated category where mom has got a high school degree or some college, but not a college degree. That's the middle group on this slide here. Or where mom has a college degree on the right of the slide here. We can see that kids who had more involved dads are significantly more likely to have graduated from college. Whereas it doesn't make as much of a difference, as you can see on this slide, for kids whose moms were high school dropouts. So kind of for the broad and middle swath of American society and for sort of the upper third of American society, what we can see here basically is that having an involved father is closely correlated with graduating from college. Now, sort of given the importance on this particular outcome of paternal involvement, also wanted to think about, well, what contexts in terms of family structure are more likely to facilitate having a father who is categorized as either involved or very involved in the data. What we can see here is that kids in the least educated homes, in the moderately educated homes, and in the most educated homes are much more likely to report that they have an involved or a very involved or highly involved dad than their peers in other types of family structures, in single, step, et cetera. So there's clearly a link here between living an intact married household and being more likely to enjoy a high level of paternal involvement in your life. So we've shown that there's an association between paternal involvement and young adults' odds of graduating from college. But why is this the case? What's the story here? And here my comments are more speculative, but I'd like to touch on 4 things briefly before we turn it over to the other panelists. And I'll touch on each of these things in the next couple of slides here. So one thing that dads, I think, can do is provide direct educational stimulus to their kids, whether it's in terms of homework help or other educational activities, or just being more generally speaking as an engaged and involved father, someone who is conveying ideas to their kids, who is giving them insights, or who just in sort of ordinary, encounters is sort of stimulating them educationally or intellectually in one way or another. So that's, I think, part of the story here. And it's important too, just to sort of add a caveat to this slide, and that is there has been some recent work discussed in The Atlantic, for instance, that suggests that there's not a clear connection between homework help per se and kids' educational attainment. But my point here is more general, and that is that just sort of having an involved father in the picture may provide a number of intellectual and educational benefits that redound to the welfare of teens and young adults. A second point is money. I think when we talk about dads today, kind of new dads today, we often forget that, money still matters in American families. And it's still the case that in the majority of married families, dads are providing the lion's share of income for their families. And so they're helping their kids often, in some ways indirectly, in terms of helping their kids to be located in schools or school districts that are more beneficial to them, or helping to pay for educational activities or private schooling that may be of some benefit to their kids. And of course, most relevant here, paying some substantial portion of their collegiate tuition. And I'm speculating here, but it could be the case that dads are more likely to devote more money to their kids' schooling when they've been able to forge a strong connection with their kids, a connection that would be reflected in part, in their involvement in their lives when they were teenagers. A third thing, and this comes out in a recent book that I co-edited with Kathy Kovner-Klein on gender and parenthood, is that the research suggests, and I'm thinking here particularly of Ross Parks' work, once again, University of California, that moms and dads both contribute in important ways to their kids' lives, but that when it comes to sort of the average paternal and maternal styles of engagement, dads are more likely to sort of be engaged in pushing their kids to embrace life's challenges, to face life's difficulties, and more generally to kind of have an outward orientation. That dads are more likely to encourage their kids to engage in novel activities, to be independent, to think about the worlds of work, sports, civil society, and politics. And the Canadian psychologist Daniel Paquette has put it, I think, nicely, and put it this way. He said, quote, "Fathers play a particularly important role in the development of children's openness to the world. They also tend to encourage children to take risks, thus permitting children to learn to be braver in unfamiliar situations, as well as to stand up for themselves." So this kind of orientation to parenting may help kids, face difficult assignments, take on important opportunities that may have some connection to their ability to attend and graduate from college later in life. And the fourth, I think in some ways, perhaps the most important point here is that dads play an important role in protecting their kids, that kids who grow up in authoritative homes where dads are involved, they're affectionate, but also firm with their kids, help their kids to steer clear of certain risks that can derail their lives and derail their possibilities for attending and graduating from college. And in some work that I published last year, I found that boys who enjoy, and this is looking at relationship quality, so it's sort of the subjective quality relationship between a father and his son. It's not measuring involvement per se, but what you can see here basically is that boys who enjoyed kind of an average quality relationship with their father or a high quality relationship with their father are much less likely to engage in delinquent behavior, which of course could derail them from attending and graduating from college. But dads also matter for daughters. And we can see here that daughters who report, once again, a kind of average in blue or a high quality relationship in yellow are much less likely to become pregnant as teenagers compared to their female peers who don't have a good relationship with their father. So dads in this context may be helping to give their daughters attention, affection that would kind of help them steer clear of a teenage pregnancy, or maybe kind of just present in real physical ways that also protect them from ending up pregnant as a teenager. So let me just wrap it up with a few quick points here. The first is that I want to be very clear in stressing that paternal involvement is not a silver bullet when it comes to this outcome, when it comes to collegiate graduation. We can see in the earlier figures that I presented that clearly class matters. And in our models, household income and maternal education were more predictive of graduation than was paternal involvement per se. We also saw that paternal involvement was not of much help for kids from the least educated homes in America. So I just want to be clear that there are a lot of factors in the mix here that are shaping teenagers, that are shaping adults' odds of succeeding when it comes to college in America. And it's not just about whether or not you have an involved father or not in your life. The second point that I think needs to be made, particularly to think more about inequality in America today, family inequality in America today, is that kids from college-educated homes have a kind of triple advantage, typically today. They tend to have more income, more assets, sort of that they can access in some way. They tend to enjoy much more family stability today than their peers from less educated homes. And as we'll see in the next slide, they enjoy more involved dads typically than their less educated peers. So these three things give them a kind of a triple advantage in life in general, I would say, but also in college more particularly in this case. And this gives you a sense of just this distribution of paternal involvement where dads are involved or highly involved in this data set by whether or not mom was a college graduate, mom was a high school graduate, or mom was a high school dropout. And clearly, once again, on the right here of this slide, you can see that kids from better educated homes are more likely to enjoy highly involved fathers. The third discussion point is that this is, and it's connected to the previous slide, is that we're seeing a growing fatherhood divide in America. And of course, the good news here is that on average, kids in America are spending more time with their fathers, and fathers spending more time with their kids. But the bad news here is that a growing share of American kids are living in a home without their father, and they don't tend to benefit, as we've seen, from this new ethic of engaged fathers. There's a growing fatherhood divide that also is tracking largely along class lines that I find troubling. So let me sum up with just this comment. In today's global economy, a college diploma has emerged as an increasingly important ticket to the American dream. Among today's millennials, college graduates earn about $17,500 more per year than their peers with only a high school diploma. Indeed, a recent Brookings Institution study found that over a lifetime, a college degree provides an income premium of about $570,000, what it called a tremendous return on that investment. And as I've shown today, young men and women with involved fathers are significantly more likely to earn a college diploma. Specifically compared to their peers whose fathers are not involved, young adults with involved fathers were at least 98% more likely to graduate from college. The good news, once again, about this is that fathers have almost doubled the average time they spend with their kids, from about 4 hours in 1995 to about 7.3 hours in 2011. The bad news is that partly because fewer adolescents are living in an intact married family, a large minority of the nation's teens, particularly ones from poor and working class homes, are not experiencing today's ethic of engaged fatherhood. Thus, if we wish to increase the odds that all young adults have a shot at the higher education of their choice, one thing that the nation needs to figure out is how to bridge the growing fatherhood divide in our country between children from college-educated homes and children from less educated homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. And now we're going to have kind of responses to Brad's work from our various panelists. And Patrick, you're first.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to be here. I want to also acknowledge Brad for the research. This is, to me, very important on many levels. I also want to acknowledge Robert for hosting us today. And then there are two guys in the audience that, from my early days, are still part of my family. One is Bill Coffin. You raise your hand, Bill. For many years on the Wade Horn, during the Bush years, Bill was the marriage guy, is what his title was. I don't know what his real title was, but he was the marriage guy during that administration. And we met at that time, and we've been friends and colleagues and laughing partners since then. And the other is Josh Good, who works here at AEI, colleague of mine as well, who's been instrumental in making today happen as well. So I just want to thank those guys up front. Now to the meat of the matter. For me, this is important, and I'll just share a little bit about myself. I'm from South Carolina, which you might hear a little bit. as I'm speaking. I grew up in an intact family. We grew up in the projects. My brothers and I have one sister, so there's three of us and one girl. And my parents were married for many, many years, until about my 10th grade year. My dad, prior to my birth, had been an alcoholic, had been to prison. When I was born, for some reason, I'm a third child, so I'm not a first, I'm not a girl. He stopped drinking. And around my 10th grade year, he was his 15th year on a job where he was entry level when he first started when I was born to now a manager. Some of his buddies invited him to take a drink in celebration of his achievement. Are y'all following this? So he declined because we had moved from the projects to a single family home on the other side of town. Second offer, he declined. The third offer, and this is typical of young men and kind of how we push each other, he accepted the offer. And that was in 1991. I was in 10th grade. And everything changed for me at that point. Everything that we owned was somehow gone because he was selling it. Everything that we had built over that 15-year period was gone. Everything that I did as a student, which was to make both my mom and dad proud, it changed for me because I was no longer focused on whatever the professor or the teacher was saying. It was really about daily, what the next day held for me. Many of my friends and classmates had the same experience where our fathers were not present, and I learned that differently. I got the vantage point of seeing him there and then not being there. Learn that differently. And so I can speak firsthand. Prior to him leaving, I was a pretty decent student. I brought home my books. I actually opened my books. And I did my work. I turned in my work. When he was gone, the factor of my mom having to now manage 4 kids by herself outweighed what she could manage and work at the same time. Does it make any sense so far? So I concur, if that's an academic word to use, with everything that you suggest. I do have a couple of points that I'll make. And so that's one element as to why this is important to me, because it touches me in a special way. If you're taking notes, I would have you parenthesize, I'm not bragging at this point, but I did finish high school. But I was third to last in my class. If you know the scale A, B, C, D, F, you know where that fits, right? I was close to the bottom. And there are several things that played itself out. When I enrolled in college, and if you can believe in miracles, I got into college. I was supported by another group of men that were not my father, but they were from my church, that said to my mom, we got your back. We're going to take care of these boys for you. We're going to help you with these boys. And so the same things that my dad gave me in the first 15 years, in all the ways that I can't explain today, those things were added back to me in terms of structure, to your point, resources, and then really just that extra push that men give to each other. I have to just say this. My mom has been, still today, I just left South Carolina on Easter break, she's still the strongest woman I know. Even with less, she did more for our family. And so that's not to take away anything that she did, but she couldn't replace my father. In the work that I do every day, managing the fatherhood.gov site and the Fatherhood Clearinghouse, one of the things that we see as we travel the country, even internationally, is that more and more the need and importance of dads is more prevalent. On the contrary, there are more and more families where dads are not married or with the kids. And so we have almost an issue that's almost a schism at this point. So that's the first point. On the second level where this is important to me is I'm a father. My wife and I have been married 17 years. The interesting thing about when my dad left, my wife became my girlfriend. And from the point that he left, she was also a reinforcing factor that said to me early on, and I played all the sports that you can name. That was another resource for us. she said to me at the time, "You are more than an athlete," and she gave me that kind of encouragement that made me believe that beyond playing ball, you can and will go to college if you're going to date me. Now, the thing that she had in her life was what? A strong father who said to her, "Don't bring no," I'm going to use some plain language. Can I use some plain language? "Don't bring no mess here." I'm going to use the word mess today. Don't bring no mess here. And for her, she knew his standard in terms of what she was to bring home in a boyfriend and eventually a husband. So although my father was absent, this is another male father figure that played an important role in my life. We have 2 daughters now. My oldest is 8, my youngest is 6. I have made a vow that I will be their first male teacher. I will be their best male teacher. And that will not come from anybody else in any other system. That will be my role. So I tell my wife all the time, if she ever leaves me, I'm going with her. Because my kids will always know me as their father. And that is an important factor as well. The last point that I'll make on terms of why this is so important is the fatherhood field, which has been around since the Clinton years. I think a lot of folks assume, and it's highly touted, that President Obama has made it a priority, and he has, and he's given us a great lift to make this a priority because of his personal story, but because he's also got the ability to make administrative moves to support the field. But since the Clinton administration, this work has been funded on different levels. It's been encouraged on different levels. Since welfare was reauthorized in '96, this has been one of the main things that they've made a priority, that 2-parent families and father involvement are very important. And so professionally speaking, this is also a platform which we see the importance of dads as well. So this is, to me, very timely. And in the fatherhood field, there's a great absence of the work around research that supports the need for dads. A couple of observations and then I'll close. The first one is that I was interested and pretty pleased to find that involved fathers where the mom was a high school dropout had 1/6 of a chance, roughly, to complete college as teens with a mom who was a college grad. And to me, this sounds somewhat contrary to the point, but to me it's good news in the sense that there are now more women that are going to college. And so if the future remains what it looks like it's going to be, we're going to have more kids who are growing up with moms who've completed college, and that's exciting for me in the work that I do, and eventually become wives and mothers as well. The second point that I thought that was interesting to me is that when it comes to college graduation, the father's role matters to young adults from moderately to highly educated homes. And to me, it just kind of reinforces the fact that when there is stability in the home, the kids do better. And stability can mean whatever you want to make it. But when both parents are home and involved, there's a clear difference. I remember the feeling of safety when my dad would lock the door at night when we were kids. I remember hearing him say, "Great play," from the stands when I was playing ball. I remember him and my mom both reading to us and putting us to bed. Those things, although you can't put your fingers on them, they mean a lot to kids in terms of their growth and development. The last point I'll make is young adults with involved fathers are 98% more likely to graduate from college. That's what I think I've read. I don't know how many channels we can get this on, but it needs to be publicized. It needs to be said to people. It needs to be on social media, traditional media, on billboards. It has to be communicated to folks in a way that they can receive it, because this is great news, but it's a secret now. And I think we have to emphasize that not only to the public, but to dads, so that they understand very early on why this is so important. My recommendations, I would say key points that I will close with are, and this is from 17 years or so of doing this work. The earlier we engage dads with their kids, particularly around schooling, the longer they're going to be involved. My kids are now 3rd and 1st grade. From the very beginning of when they were in daycare, and this is a new phenomenon, there was like the donuts and dads moments where they'd invite dads to come in and fix the tables. I've never left the school since then. My father, when I was early on, the only time he came to the school was to fix something, and it wasn't a table. It was my brothers and I, and he was using corporal punishment, we'll use that term, in the classroom. The more that you can engage dads in terms of not just in that realm, but the academics, the longer they're going to be involved. My father and I, just to end the story on here, I re-engaged during my college years. And for me at 21, 22, it might seem insignificant, but I felt different knowing that my dad was there to say, "I'm proud of you again." And so that matters a great deal. The second point that I'll make is that fathers need the same resources and support as mothers when it comes to engaging and being with their kids. My mother speaks of the time when she was a parent or being a young teen mom, having all sorts of supports around what she needs to do. And my father had really none of those things. Today, when I think about my child, my first child being born, everything that my wife was invited to at the hospital, I was invited to. Everything that she got sent home from the hospital or the school comes to me now as well. And so the point is that dads need the same supports as mom to be engaged parents. Academically speaking, when I think about it on a systems level, administrators and educators on all levels, I believe, need to be made aware of some of these starking statistics around the importance of both dads and moms being involved. The point is made here that both parents, when they're involved, lead to greater outcomes from what I think the schools want to see are their students doing well. And so that's a key point. And then last but not least, it's imperative that we take into account the impact influence of the social factors that play into the lives of these kids when the fathers are not present. I've since studied, examined myself personally along with my friends, and there's a resilience factor that I'm not sure you X or Y or Z it, but it plays into a lot of these kids who do well in spite of the odds. And the resilience factor you cannot not account for when it comes to these families. So I'll end with those points. Again, I'm thankful and delighted to be here, and I look forward to the conversation following.
Good afternoon. I want to thank Patrick for reminding me that whenever we family scholars are talking about family stability, family disruption, what we're really talking about is children who are experiencing a great sense of loss. And sometimes that gets lost in the abstract language. So thank you for telling me that. And thank you, Brad, for this important research. I sometimes forget because it seems, so obvious to me. Fathers matter, I mean, but the truth is we're living in a society where that people are not sure about that, and so it's anything we can do to reinforce that message is of vital importance. I was very struck by the difference between educated and less educated families here, fathers here. I think you saw it in the in the number 2, figure 2. We see that educated fathers are more likely to be involved with their kids regardless of family structure.
Right.
Okay, so there's something about education that is making a huge difference here. And notice also that it had, the father involvement had no impact on the chances for the children of mothers who are high school dropouts. So education, as I say, is very key. And, that made me think a little bit about why that would be. And I think probably many people in this room are aware that the educated middle class in the United States, perhaps in other countries, other developed countries as well, have really redefined fatherhood over the past decades. When I was growing up, I hate that phrase, but when I was growing up, the typical image of the father was the guy with the newspaper in front of his face, and at the meals, and occasionally you'd get a monosyllable from him, yup, nope. Who was gone all weekend, maybe playing golf or having drinks with his buddies, and who definitely did not know the names of the pediatrician, the teacher, the friends. Okay, so that was this sort of old model fathers. He was around, he had a job, which was to provide for his family, and hopefully he did that well. But in terms of actually knowing his kids or being involved in their sort of the basic care of their children. That wasn't part of the story. Now, today, you still hear women complain that their husbands don't know the names of the pediatrician. I know that you still hear that. But they are likely to know the names of the children's friends and their teachers. And they'll definitely know the sports schedule. I think that we can't underestimate how much the spread of Little League sports has influenced father involvement in the middle class. So that's a sort of interesting sidelight that I noticed, thought about as we were talking about this. Now, what we see in this chart of figure 2 is that this norm, this sort of educated middle class norm of father intense involvement, is not trickling down from the educated elites. Now, we could say, well, that's partly, I mean, there's no question, it's related to family breakdown. I mean, if a father's not in the house, he's going to be less involved. If the father can't, has a lousy relationship with the mother, the child's mother, well, it becomes much harder for him to get past her, who is almost always the gatekeeper in these situations. So we could say, well, those things are clearly connected, and they are connected, but I wonder if they're connected in a way that is less obvious than at first sight. That they're not. It's not so much that family breakdown means less involved fathers as cause and effect, but rather that they're kind of two sides of the same coin. So let me speculate this way. What we're seeing in the current economy, and I'm not talking about the recession economy. I'm talking just about the knowledge economy more generally that has developed over the last decades, is the ever-growing importance of abstraction, verbal skills, and what's often called soft skills by experts to get you through school and to get you into a good job in the labor market, right? So those characteristics, those qualities, that ability to make the abstractions, that ability to be verbal, and to have the persistence and sort of flexibility and savvy that is required to negotiate this very complicated economy is something that really works in the family as well. For better or worse, the relations between the sexes today are ill-defined, they're fluid, they're variable, much like the economy. So what happens is that the individual is forced to negotiate their own way, and that's what happens in families as well. It's negotiation all the time, all right? Especially in two-earner families. Look, it used to be, like I said, the guy knew he was supposed to be a provider. He knew his wife was supposed to make dinner and take care of the kids, including taking them to the pediatrician. The wife knew exactly what was expected of her. Perhaps there were problems with this. I'm sure there were. I remember seeing it, but it was all clear, and you didn't have to be, have any special abstract skills to figure out those roles. So this was the previous world that didn't require sort of negotiating, thinking through, trying to figure out who was going to pick up the kids, on Tuesday, who was in charge of the dentist appointment, when it comes to scheduling, but right down to just negotiating through conflict in the relationship itself. That requires a lot of verbal skills that come better to those who have been educated. So I think that the cause and effect here is a little bit complicated. In addition, that same father who maybe has those abstract and verbal skills is better able to talk to his children and is better able to be the involved dad that they need. I think that what Brad was saying before about it's not just helping with the homework per se, it's being able to have those discussions about the world around them that develops the brain. Notice also that the contemporary educated dad has also gotten much better than the dads when I was growing up talking about feelings, right? That's part of the verbal skills, and it also helps them, again, negotiate with their wives, with their kids, and to also model for their kids that ability for the future. So, just to sum up, I think the same qualities, the same skills that allow people to go to college and to graduate college allows them to thrive or at least function in a very complex labor market and allows them to negotiate these very unregulated, unnormed, if you will, relationships with their wives, with their kids. And that's a sort of pessimistic view in a way because it's not clear how you get people with less education and fewer of those skills to become the kind of involved parents, and this I would argue would be true for mothers and fathers, that we need to see the kind of improvement in mobility, the upward mobility that we all would like to see. So that's my comment.
Richard, you all right? You ready? Okay.
First of all, thank you, Professor Wilcox, for that presentation. I thought it was very interesting, and thank you, Mr. Dorr, for arranging this. Hello, everyone. I'm very heartened to see so many people here interested and invested in this issue. Certainly, going to college now, I can say that a lot of my colleagues have had very positive experiences with their fathers and have experienced, fathers invested in them since a very young age. And I think it has really made a difference. So I'll provide some evidence from that. Recently, I was part of a survey conducted by one of my colleagues who is a Jefferson scholar. Yes, thank you. He focused on his own class, on second-year scholars, and dividing about evenly between the genders, but he also interviewed some others. And clearly, there is an overwhelming majority reported heavy or rather moderate involvement from fathers in their lives. And this is rather significant. And when we look through the anecdotal evidence that was provided by some of the respondents, it became very clear that the role of the father in this type of involvement was exemplary, that the father stands as the example, as the standard of action in a number of ways, moral, academic, and even leisurely. Moral specifically, the father often would stand out as a type of leader. Many of them, for instance, I have a friend whose father is a neurosurgeon. He sees that as a type of leadership in his workplace, and it has helped motivate him towards working towards a biomedical engineering degree. Other examples, one of the other survey respondents reported how this is also work-related for that matter, his father had gotten into competition with some of his coworkers about who could be the better dad. And so his father started to get very involved in his extracurricular activities. He would, for instance, coach his Little League teams, and thank you, Ms. Heimowitz, for that. Certainly that is a good example of this kind of leadership made visible to the child earlier and earlier on, provides a good example and something to strive towards. And certainly for the Jefferson scholars, where leadership is one of the three main values along with scholarship and citizenship, clearly there's been an impact here. And of course, academics are also very important in this matter. And for me, in my own experience, I went to my father for homework help, although I know that that's not necessarily gender correlated. Certainly, mothers can also give lots of help in that regard. But for me, I always saw my father as a great standard for having a great work ethic. He feels guilty if he works for less than half the day, on a Sunday. He's very, yeah, I mean, he's a very, very hard worker. I mean, almost to the excess, but nonetheless, he taught me that you have to be committed to whatever you're doing. Once you've entered that commitment, I mean, he's been in the same company for 20 years. He showed me that you are bound to that, and that's something that's been very strong for him. And I think that though that is also a moral example, it does fit in with the academic element as well. Because for me, not working yet in a formal economic way, focusing on my studies, I always felt very compelled to finish my work from that sort of angle. And as for leisure, this is also something that came through. One of the other respondents mentioned that his father became his scoutmaster. The respondent showed that fathers who help structure their leisure activities give them examples of how to blow off steam in a constructive way, in a safe way. Some of the things that you were talking about, Professor Wilcox, certainly. And also to avoid some of the more dangerous examples, as you mentioned, with getting involved in delinquency and teenage pregnancy for girls. So in short, I would say that this survey that was conducted by one of my colleagues does show that, at least in the Jefferson Scholars, there is a very high degree of paternal involvement. And that, I think, is something that bears on more generally society, specifically with education. So.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was excellent. I was sitting there worried because we have such a great panel, and you were last, and maybe you felt some pressure, but you really, those Jefferson Scholars really are something down there in Virginia. So that was very good. Thank you very much. I want to open up for questions, but I want to start with one. Like Patrick, I've been in the fatherhood promotion business for a long time, mostly from the government, and struggled with it because it's hard to do and hard to get exactly right. And so I want to ask each of the panelists, starting with Brad and then going that way and finishing with Patrick, some of these questions well done. What can government do about this to increase father involvement in children's lives so that they graduate from college more likely? And if you only get one chance, so I'm going to ask a little more, do you stress father involvement or do you stress marriage? And so, because sometimes in government you only get one chance. And in New York City, our experience was we had to stress father involvement because marriage was too big a issue. And I did that for 10 years, and I don't know that we moved the needle one bit. So sorry to give you that little tip. But so, Brad, what can government do? And if they're going to do something, how are you going to resolve this involvement versus marriage issue? How would you recommend? It's right. New button.
Okay. Well, you really know how to put us in the hot seat here, Robert. Well, in terms of stressing fatherhood versus marriage, I mean, I would come down on the side of marriage, insofar as that's one of the key institutions that tends to connect men to their kids on average. But beyond that, I think it's important not to have a kind of, silver bullet mentality. There's one policy that's going to be the policy that's going to help renew the connection between, men and their kids, particularly in working class and poor communities. And I think we have to think about shoring up the economic foundations of working class and poor communities, making sure that we have better job opportunities for working class men, for instance, that will make them more attractive to the women in their lives and increase their odds of forming and sustaining marriage. So we have a piece in Slate, for instance, today by June Carbone and Naomi Kahn that basically is saying that for for women, working class women today in America, marriage isn't a really good deal for them because the men in their lives don't have good jobs and often have personal problems of one sort or another. So the economic piece has got to be part of the solution. But I think we also have to have policies that don't penalize marriage, and we also have to policies that give the public a fair-minded view of what marriage and fatherhood do for kids, so there isn't that kind of ignorance of the important role that dads play in their lives on average that I think is out there in a substantial share of our population today. So what I'm saying is looking at things like reducing the marriage penalty, shoring up economic foundations of working class and poor families, particularly men's job opportunities, and having some kind of public campaign, some kind of social media campaign that would kind of educate the public about the value of both marriage and fatherhood.
Okay?
Yeah, I would agree that most of the work that government can do has to be on the order of education about what we know just from the research. I mean, you don't have to get very political about it or ideological about it. The research is glaringly in favor of more stable environments with two parents, with fathers and fathers, in the house. So that's one thing. One of the questions that comes up I've seen recently is not just do we emphasize fatherhood promotion or marriage promotion, but is there a way to talk about marriage without talking about marriage? So Brad and I were involved in a little Twitter back and forth with some other people recently where they were saying they thought, and a couple of the people involved were, I think, on the left, they thought that family stability would be something that people could get behind, that wouldn't be the same, raise the same flags as marriage seems to. Brad and I were both a little skeptical about that. For one thing, it's not clear to me how you promote stability if you can't promote marriage. They tend to be the same thing, actually, in practice, at least in the United States. But that could be one way to at least advance the discussion, because in my experience, if you say, look, at the very least, can't we say to people, you should be in a very committed relationship before you have a child? Generally, they agree. But I have to say, even there, they're a little reluctant. So I'm, again, kind of pessimistic about how far we can go with this. And certainly you can't ask government to be making a case for something on which there is no consensus out there. And that's what worries me about I think the reason you didn't see any movement in the needle was people didn't buy it. They don't agree. Or they agree on some kind of very obscure, abstract level, but they don't feel it as a really important thing for them, their children, and their neighbors.
Richard, do you have any?
I would be inclined to say marriage, because marriage tends to involve other social institutions that then inculcate fatherhood involvement, for instance, religious institutions. Though I'm not frankly sure that how much the government can do. I'm not a policy major. I don't pretend to understand that completely. However, it would seem to me that this is a cultural issue, and I'm not entirely sure that government is always going to be the best instrument to affect that kind of an issue. So I'm not entirely sure if there's any particular policy that would work in this regard, but I'm not entirely sure.
Patrick?
Oh, great questions. On the government's role, I'm going to give a nod. I used to be a federal employee, so I would just echo what I think is true. They've done some incredible things. And since 2006, the government has funded hundreds of millions of dollars in programming on the ground to support fatherhood and healthy marriage programs. So I don't want to be greedy and ask for more money, but if this is being taped, I would suggest, and if it's not money, it's the support that would encourage systems to embrace dads. And when I speak about that, I think about the hospital system with the ACA and how important it is. Even now that we have men who are now covered, they still walk in the waiting rooms where the clerk, male and female clerks, are not used to seeing male clients, and they don't receive them. And in my work, 17 years working with dads, the first encounter that they have that's not good, they very rarely come back. If they were students in school and they were treated poorly, they don't like going back to school, regardless if their kids are there or not. If it's the employment industry, providing supports to make them more father-friendly. So if I had to give a suggestion, a recommendation, it would be funding / reinforcement that systems are prepared to receive dads more friendly, if that makes any sense. If I had to support or promote marriage or fatherhood, that's very tough for me. I have served in a capacity with Bill where we were the few shepherds who would travel the country promoting marriage. I'm black. I know I'm surprising people when I say that. But, in the black community, the marriage numbers are fairly low. And there's not as high an appreciation as it was when I was growing up for marriage. And there are several things that play into that role. But I'm still a huge proponent of marriage. And Bill knows we were sacrificed in many meetings when we make these comments. But for me, the data suggests and my life suggests that kids are better when mama and daddy are married. My mama made more money. I'm using some plain language. She made more money when my dad was there than when he wasn't there. Does that make any sense? On the fatherhood realm, my dad was healthier when he was married to my mama. So you're asking me this tough question, but I'm both a husband and a father. I can do both. And when I think about the system, social system, and where we do this work, representing the president, the HHS arm, but also the fatherhood field, when we go places, we get asked this question a good bit too. I don't choose a side. I usually say, you can do both. You can do both. So I'll end with that tricky answer.
So let's open it up to questions from the audience. And well, the typical AEI proviso is we want questions as well as comments. So, lady in the red, raised. Oh, first. Okay.
Well, we were kind of simultaneous.
No fighting.
I thought that was the two fastest hands I've ever seen. That was a real race. But go ahead.
My name is Roberta Stanley, and I'm a longtime K-12 advocate. I think those of us who are a little older, the baby boomers, that there was a line of demarcation because our fathers went to war and came home from the military and were more organized and perhaps dictatorial. And Kay alluded to it a little bit. I'd like you to kind of elaborate on that difference of parenting that those fathers brought to us. They also brought it to the schools because a lot of them took advantage of the GI Bill.
Okay.
You mean to describe a little bit more about the father, the old-fashioned father? It wasn't just that they were not expected to be involved in the sort of day-to-day child rearing. That was really up to the mother. But it was also, there was a different emotional style, particularly right after the war. You've probably heard, all of you, not just boomers, have probably heard stories about these guys who came back from horrid experiences during the war who didn't want to talk about it and didn't talk about it. My father certainly did not until fairly recently. That's sort of not the way we go today. People are much more expressive, self-expressive, much more communicative. That's the way we do things. And I think that different image of the father as sort of in charge, not cold exactly, it could be very loving, but not expressive about himself. He was playing a role, and that role was to be the provider, the father, the husband, and he was doing what he could to fit to that role. Now that, the downside, as I probably don't need to tell you, is that it didn't allow for a lot of individuality and personal expression. The upside was it made for more stability, and perhaps less, and perhaps more happiness. It's kind of hard to know. Yeah.
Brad, in answering this question, I wondered if you'd address a little more elaboration on changes in the labor market for men and the returns for work that may have also contributed to men feeling less able to be the sole provider in a household.
Well, it's certainly the case that women are playing a much bigger role, that the vast majority of families today have a mom in the workforce, and that's obviously a big shift here, both for them and for the men in their lives, and the fathers in the picture here. But I guess I actually wanted to kind of turn to one of Kay's comments in terms of, I think that Kay is right in terms of saying that there is this sort of big gradient today when it comes to fatherhood involvement and engagement by class. And it's not just about marriage, it's about a more general orientation to life and family life in particular. But I think rather than sort of accepting that as the sort of reality that it's going to be going forward, I think we also have to sort of reimagine ways that men can relate to their children, and to realize that, that men can relate to their kids at a variety of different levels. And for some men, it's going to be about having that intense series of conversations with their children. But there are plenty of guys, myself included at times, who are not always that expressive. And that there are other ways that we can signal our love, our affection, our attention, towards our kids without being, as expressive in the sort of new father mode. And so, whether that's playing sports, whether that's, I've got a son, for instance, who likes to take metal rods in the back, have like a little fire pit, and make them into various things, and engaging him around working with his hands and metal, for me is a challenge, but that's the kind of thing that I think might be more attractive to some kinds of dads, and to sort of get the message out to them that that type of being, or that type of fatherhood style is appropriate and valued. So I think we have to also be careful about trying to sort of, in a sense, broaden our understanding and appreciation for different ways that men can relate to their kids too in this new fatherhood moment.
So now your turn. Sure.
Basically, the message here, thanks if you could hold that. Basically, the message here is a conservative message, regardless of what side you normally come from philosophically. And I'm just curious, I'd love to hear your opinions about the systematic, if not deliberate, effort on the part of many who control our culture to minimize, if not emasculate, men and the role of fathers. And I would say it's gone on for decades, and the black family has been treated very, very poorly, and instead of being helped in general, they've actually had the rug pulled out from underneath them, just similar, or not dissimilar, from what happened to you when you were in 10th grade. You're on this trajectory of from birth to moving on, and all of a sudden you hit the culture, and they're saying, ooh, this is wrong, you're not cool, your pants are wrong, whatever. It's a disaster for impressionable young people, white or black.
Okay, so Patrick, and we're gonna have all four of us. I'm gonna comment on this too. So talk about the culture and what the culture messages have done.
It's a great question, and I struggle with it because the year, now I'm older. I'm 39 now. The 15 years I had my dad, he left some really strong messages with me and my brothers. You will wear a belt. You will look decent. You will represent this family. And although he was gone, those are still things that live with me today. I grew up, I finished high school in '92, and the rap music, the pop culture was at the time like really starting to penetrate everything. But I still hold true to the fact that if your foundation is strong, you're in a good place. So that's my personal response. Professionally speaking, when I do visit these fatherhood programs, and I do visit schools, and when I see my kids' friends, I am concerned. Because at a certain level, My mother controlled everything that came in our house. Even when I snuck it in, she knew we snuck it in. Today, kids, it's hard for parents. I'm a parent. It's hard to control the range of things that are introduced to kids. You know, I may take all the TVs, but if their friends have a phone at school, are y'all following me? They can pull up these same things I'm trying to ward against for my kids. So your question has me perplexed. What I always say to folks is, train them early, train them young, and set your foundation, which is what I got. On the programmatic scale, when we talk about our messaging, under the President's Father Clearinghouse, we do have a media campaign. Some of you may be aware, some of you may not be aware, but it is about the size of this cup in this room when I think about the general culture, you know what I mean? And so we're fighting against the wind, but I still walk every day, and Bill knows this. We walked into rooms where people would almost cheer against us, but we're supporting something that I think might not meet all, but will meet some. Does that make any sense? Yeah, I mean, so we have to continue. Well, you have to. I think you have to take a stand on it, but I'll just end with this point. There is still hope. My kids are going to marry someday. No mess. Trust me on that. No mess. And I'm teaching them what I learned, but when I think about the pop culture, I'll end with this comment. When I think about the pop culture, it is something we need to be aware of, but not afraid of. And when we do our fatherhood programs, we actually integrate in our services with these fathers and these couples the fact that this will influence the way you parent your kids and the way your kids see the world. So I'll stop with that.
Richard?
Well, I think I'll speak from my own experience being at the university, in the academy right now. It's the question of fatherhood itself doesn't come up a lot, but in general, the cultural messages that are in the academy are not positive. They're not conducive to good fatherhood and those habits. You know, the whole narrative of the gender war that is kind of pushed is really problematic. And I think even the presence of women's and gender studies at universities is not helpful. If you could imagine it being retitled men's and gender studies, I mean, you imagine the outrage that there would be. I mean, this is not helpful to have this kind of division in the very structure of the academy. In addition, just among student life, you know, university student life is popular culture amplified. Our social lives, in some sense, revolve around references to popular culture. We you know, tell jokes that are defined in some sense by popular culture. It permeates everything we do in some measure, and that's not always a good thing. So, you know, the dining hall, for instance, you're walking around and they play songs like Robin Thicke singing "Blurred Lines," which is a song essentially about rape. I mean, it's really powerful, right, when you have these subtle negative influences. And while none of these affect fatherhood directly, these all serve as negative influences just generally on gender relations. And I mean, it's a very fraught time anyway for gender relations. Certainly, you know, the dating scene is difficult. It's a time when, you know, people are trying to get serious about their relationships. It doesn't help to have these messages of irresponsibility and these messages of competition and really unnecessary competition that can turn very negative very quickly, that are amplified in the university setting. And I think that sets a bad precedent later on when they do want to have children, and probably affects marriage. I mean, you were talking about communication earlier. I mean, it's not helpful when you do want to have positive communication. So,
Kay?
I would agree that the elite messaging about men has been less than flattering. Not just in the academy, though. I think that's a really important point, but also in the media. What I've noticed over and over again is that we have a younger generation of journalists who now are dominating the internet media, which is a very powerful force in young people's lives now, who have gone through these gender studies classes and have swallowed it for the most part. They really think nothing of trying to reshape men or insisting that men be reshaped, and of having very little tolerance for different masculine styles. And it's a real problem. That said, I'm a little less worried about the popular culture that you're referring to. Not that I don't think it's not a problem, but in my experience, I used to worry about this a lot when my kids were younger, and then they grew up and they didn't act like rap singers at all. So I thought, well, at any rate, what I thought is, parents are really mediating the media. And even if when you hear your kid repeating the lyrics of some god-awful song, that doesn't mean that's what they think. Right. So yes, and that is a big problem. So what happens is that when you have a weaker family, I think the popular culture plays a much more powerful role.
It's another parent.
Yeah. Brad?
I'm just going to say quickly that, in debates about family life, marriage, family inequality more generally, I think a lot of the discussion on both the right and the left revolves around questions of economics and public policy. And we haven't really done as much research and as much sort of public thinking about the way in which pop culture, particularly but culture more generally, is playing out in all this. And I think that question is certainly one that I want to tackle very concretely in the year ahead, and looking at, well, what can we see about how people's encounter with, particularly say the popular culture, is how's that connected to the sort of family stratification that we're now seeing today in American society? So more to come on that.
Can I just add one thing? I'm sorry to interrupt. I know you want to say something, but it occurs to me that actually that is connected to the elite problem that I just discussed, because what happens is that among well-educated young people, they've escaped this stuff. They don't have to worry about it, and it looks dumb to them and prudish and uptight to be criticizing it, because it has not affected them deeply. So that's a big problem in trying to talk about. There is a real divide in terms of people's experience of pop culture.
And the divide extends to this, and that is that, at least when it comes to television viewing, there is a big class divide in American life. The kids from better educated homes watch a lot less TV. Not that that's the be all and end all, but it certainly there is, and that may matter for for their outcomes. We don't know, but these cultural differences once again emerge in ways that may have consequences for this broader subject.
I'm maybe a little more hopeful. I think there has been more of a shift toward the consensus. I think in the academy, the extent to which college-educated young men and women are getting married, and I wish they would preach what they practice, but whatever influences are happening in UVA or at any colleges, they don't seem to be so negative that people are turning away from marriage. So I'm a little more hopeful about that. And I on the other hand, our major media, the New York Times, I was thinking about it 18 months ago, did a great big, I think, 2-part story about college outcomes for young women graduating from high schools in various parts of the Southeast and how they did in college. And they didn't do very well. And there were lots of factors described in great detail, but never once did they decide to cover about the presence of a father in those households. So you didn't know. It sounded like they weren't there, but it wasn't discussed. And so that was disappointing. Another disappointment has been to me, and this is a reach, but as a practicing Catholic, the Catholic Church does a lot of things, but I don't hear them talking about the sacrament of marriage very much, and the extent to which Hispanic families are being formed outside of marriage is really significant. And where has this institution of our culture been? And that, I think, is something that is a downside. On the upside is the president and the first lady, who set a tremendous example. I ran an agency that was overwhelmingly African American or Hispanic, and 1 out of 2 desks had a picture of the president or the first lady at their desk in their workplace. This is an enormous, and their model is a good model, and they are lovely parents, and they have a strong marriage. And at his best, the president does talk about it, and the First Lady has talked about it. They just need to do it more. So I'm a little more hopeful. The popular culture is out there, and it is doing great damage in many ways. But I think if we keep standing up and keep pushing back in a way that is entertaining and has a certain zip of its own, I think we'll be able to have our say.
I'm just going to, on that same point, just make 2 quick points. So if you look at the last 10 years, there have been efforts made, movies, TV shows, where there's a dad in the home. And even they're not even married, maybe step-parents, but the role of fathers has played you see it way more now on the screen than you did before. And then the last thing I'll mention is, to your point, the president and the First Lady, they have embodied, and we did a focus group with fathers in 6 different parts of the country. And it was interesting because they all clapped when we talked about their marriage. And then we asked about marriage, what's the good, what's the bad? And they were all hopeful about getting married. But without fail, the general consensus was they feared the sense of failure. And what they're talking about is the divorce phenomena, the nasty breakups that in the media as well, you see that played out as well. So there's this out of balance experience. But for a lot of these fathers, a lot of these families, low income as well, marriage is still something they uphold. It's just something that some of them, and I'm speaking from experience, don't see it as something they can grab themselves. So I'll end with that.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and I'll come over here to you. Right here. Did you want to pick the questions? I'm sorry. Did I take your job? I didn't mean to. Sorry.
So, hi. I was really struck by the very beginning of what Mr. Wilcox was saying, and the fact that you said that you had involved in the questionnaire not just fathers, but father figures. And I wondered if you had dissected the data to pull apart fathers from father figures and what that said, and then also if there was no difference, whether or not this is completely derailing the last 30 minutes of your conversation, but whether or not the conversation should be more about men involved in children's lives, period, and not just fathers involved with their own children's lives.
That's a great point.
Do you want to take that one?
It's a great question. As I understand it from the survey, it was basically asking them, basically they used the term father, but the kids could use that. It was through how they were conceptualizing it. So the odds are that it would have been primarily biological fathers and stepfathers, but that, they may have, conceptualized that in a somewhat different way. But I think your broader question is an important one, and that is, can men in general, as they did in some ways for Patrick, can they kind of step in for a child and perform the role of a father for him? In ways that are, largely or largely substitute for the lack of, say, an active father. And as someone who's raised in a single mother household without a father in the home, I certainly also benefited as a kid from men who did this in my own life. And I think that up to a point, the answer is yes. That men who are not the father of the child can do that for him. But I think in terms of, establishing a kind of long-term, consistent, engaged, invested approach to a particular child, a father has a unique advantage, obviously. And I had big brothers growing up, in the Big Brothers program, and they were great, but they were there for maybe a year or 2 or 3 at most. They were not there from my infancy to my adulthood. And the ideal that I think that, at least I'm trying to articulate here is that it'd be better for kids, and frankly for men themselves when they have kids, to have that long-term relationship where there's a history, there is a future, there is a present that partakes in all of that, and that's something that's different than just having a variety of different men, sort of acting in an easeful or pro-social manner at various points in your life.
And there's love, right? Which makes a difference.
There is a difference. It's nothing like hearing your dad say, "I'm proud of you." I've heard it from other men who've helped me tremendously, and I've shared this with a bunch of my colleagues and friends. But it's different when your dad says, "I'm proud of you." Very different.
Yeah. And I would just add as a last point, Sarah McClanahan at Princeton has done a lot of work on families and has indicated in some of her most recent work that there is often an issue not just with father absence, but with multiple male presence in the household not being good, you know, over time. And so I encourage, first of all, to read and follow all of our panelists here and stay involved in this issue, and thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Great job. Great job, Richard.